Have you ever woken up and felt something was wrong before you even opened your eyes? That was how it began for me the morning my brand new phone disappeared. My name is Elijah, and this isn't just about a phone. It's about the moment I realized I was never truly a daughter in my family, just a resource. I had saved for 7 long months, working extra shifts at the CAF, skipping lunches, saying maybe next time to friends, just to buy that phone with my own money. It wasn't about status, it was proof that I could rely on myself, that I didn't need to ask my parents for anything and endure the invisible debt that always followed. The night I bought it, I remember placing it carefully on my nightstand, the screen glowing softly in the dark, feeling proud in a way I rarely allowed myself to feel. But when I woke up, my fingers reached for empty wood. At first, I thought I'd knocked it off in my sleep. I checked under the bed, under the pillow, even inside my blanket folds, but it was gone. My stomach tightened as I walked into the kitchen, trying to stay calm, telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Then I saw him, my younger brother Daniel, sitting at the table, casually scrolling on my phone. My brain stalled. It felt like reality had glitched. My mother looked up and said, "Oh, you're awake," as if nothing was unusual. When I asked why Daniel had my phone, my father sighed and told me not to start. Not to start. I wasn't starting anything. I was trying to understand why something I paid for was in his hands. That's when my mom said it plainly. They had given it to him. Given it to him. Because he needed a better phone. Because his friends had newer ones. Because mine was better than his. I reminded them I bought it with my own money, and my father's voice hardened, telling me to lower my tone. My mother folded her arms and reminded me I lived there rent-free, as if my existence was an expense account they could invoice at any moment. Daniel barely looked guilty. He said it wasn't a big deal and that he'd use it more anyway. And in that moment, something shifted inside me, not a dramatic explosion, not tears, but a quiet crack in the ice. It wasn't knee behavior. It was just clearer this time. I remembered giving him my birthday money because he deserved something too, canceling my school trip so his soccer camp could be paid for. Being told I was the mature one, the understanding one, the one who didn't need as much. He always needed more. I always had less. When I asked for it back, I was called selfish. Selfish for wanting what I worked for. My mother told me to be understanding because I was older by 2 years, apparently old enough to subsidize my brother's social image. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I walked back to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed. For the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I calculated. If they could walk into my room and take something that belonged to me without hesitation, what else had they taken? I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account, and that's when the real cold settled into my bones. Small withdrawals. Random amounts. Just enough to avoid attention. Transactions I didn't make. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation, but deep down, I already knew. The phone wasn't the real theft. It was just the symbol. What they had really taken was my privacy, my savings, my sense of security. For years I tried to be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, thinking that if I made myself small, I would be safe. But being easy only made me convenient. That morning, as I sat there staring at numbers that didn't add up, I understood something clearly for the first time. They thought they had simply given my phone to my brother. But what they had actually done was erase the last version of me that stayed silent. It's strange how one small theft can unlock years of memories you've been pretending not to see. After that morning, after the kitchen confrontation, and the discovery of those quiet withdrawals from my bank account, I couldn't unsee the pattern anymore. The phone wasn't an isolated incident, it was a symptom. And once I started tracing the pattern backward, it was everywhere. Daniel had always been the sun in our house. The rest of us were just expected to orbit around him. When he forgot homework, it was because teachers were too demanding. When I forgot something, it was because I was careless. When he broke a lamp playing inside, it was an accident. When I chipped a plate washing dishes, it was irresponsibility. The rules bent around him like softened metal, but for me, they were rigid and sharp. I used to tell myself it was normal, that little brothers needed more attention, that I was stronger, more mature, that being the responsible one was a compliment. But responsibility without respect is just exploitation dressed up as praise. That afternoon, I stayed in my room, listening to Daniel laugh in the living room as he explored my phone, my apps, my photos, my messages. The thought of him scrolling through my private conversations made my skin crawl. I marched back out and demanded it again, more firmly this time. I need it back. Now. He looked at MOM before answering, like he needed confirmation that the shield was still up. I already transferred my stuff onto it, he said, shrugging. Dad didn't even look up from the TV. Drop it, Elijah. We've already decided. The word echoed in my head. They had held a family meeting about my property without me. That was the moment I understood something crucial. I wasn't considered an equal member of this family. I was an asset, earnings included, opinions excluded. That evening, I confronted Daniel alone. I found him in his room, door half closed, my phone lighting up his face. Did you ask for it? I asked quietly. He hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. I just said mine was slow, he muttered. They offered, as if it were a spare sweater lying around, not something I'd bled overtime hours to afford. You knew it was mine. He rolled his eyes. You're so dramatic. It's just a phone, just a phone. I stared at him, really stared, and saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. He wasn't clueless. He was comfortable. Comfortable knowing I would absorb the loss. Comfortable knowing they would defend him. Comfortable knowing I would be painted as unreasonable if I protested too much. That night, more memories surfaced whether I wanted them to or not. The time I secretly gave Daniel part of my savings so he wouldn't feel left out when his friends bought gaming consoles. The time MOM borrowed money from me to cover his extracurricular fees and never paid it back. The way my achievements were acknowledged with polite nods while his average report cards were celebrated like national victories. I remembered overhearing my aunt once whisper, Elijah is so self-sufficient. They're lucky. The irony almost made me laugh. Self-sufficient didn't mean independent, it meant unattended. The next morning, I called my bank. My voice was steady, even though my hands weren't. I asked about the withdrawals. The representative confirmed they had been made with my debit card details, not in person. My card had never left my wallet, which meant someone had taken the numbers. I hung up slowly, my heart beat loud in my ears. There was only one place I kept my banking information written down, inside a notebook in my desk drawer. A drawer my parents had full access to. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't sadness, it was clarity sharpening into something harder. Tea breakfast. I asked casually, has anyone needed to borrow my debit card information recently? Mom froze for half a second before recovering. Why would we? She replied too quickly. Dad frowned. What are you implying? I held his gaze. There have been withdrawals I didn't make. Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Mom's tone turned defensive. We've spent so much on you over the years. Food, clothes, school, and you were interrogating us over a little money. There was again the invoice. The reminder that my existence was transactional. I realized then that even if they had taken it, they would never admit it. And if they did, it would somehow still be my fault for noticing. But something else changed inside me that day. For the first time, I stopped trying to win the argument. I stopped trying to prove I was right. I just observed. I watched how quickly they united when I questioned anything. I watched how Daniel avoided eye contact but didn't offer to return the phone. I watched how my parents reframed theft as sacrifice, boundaries as disrespect, and fairness as selfishness. And instead of reacting, I began planning. If they believed I owed them for living under their roof, fine. I would make sure I owed them nothing. I picked up extra shifts at work without telling them. I opened a new bank account, online paperless statements, two-factor authentication, no physical mail. I changed every password I had. I started keeping my documents in a locked folder in my backpack, which I kept with me at all times. Small steps. Quiet steps. They thought the conflict had passed because I wasn't arguing anymore. They mistook my silence for surrender. Meanwhile, Daniel flaunted the phone like a trophy. He brought friends over more often. I overheard him bragging that our parents always made sure he had the best. The best. I wondered if he ever thought about who quietly absorbed the cost of that best. Maybe he didn't need to. He'd never been required to. One evening, Mom knocked on my door. You've been distant, she said, as if it were an accusation. I almost laughed. Distant. After they'd walked into my room and taken what was mine. After they'd siphoned money from my account, I was the one creating distance. I'm just busy, I replied calmly. She studied me like she was trying to find the old Elijah, the compliant one. We did what we thought was fair, she insisted. Fair. The word had lost all meaning in this house. I nodded slowly, not agreeing, just acknowledging that she believed it. And that belief was unshakable. That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything in my head. The phone. The withdrawals. The years of subtle favoritism disguised as necessity. I realized I had spent most of my life trying to earn love that was supposedly unconditional. Trying to be indispensable so I wouldn't be disposable. But the truth was brutal and simple. The more dependable I became, the more they depended on taking from me. As I made a promise to myself in the dark. I wouldn't fight louder. I wouldn't beg for fairness. I wouldn't demand apologies they'd never give. I would do something far more unsettling. I would detach. I would build a version of my life that didn't require their permission or validation. And when the time came, I wouldn't live in anger. I would live in clarity. They thought giving my phone to Daniel was a small decision. They thought the bank withdrawals would go unnoticed. They thought calling me selfish would shrink me back into compliance. What they didn't realize was that every dismissal, every excuse, every understanding was chiseling away at the last illusion I had about this family. And once an illusion shatters, it never reforms the same way. Part of me still wished they would wake up one morning and realize what they'd done. That they would knock on my door with the phone in hand and say, "We were wrong. But another part of me, the growing, steadier part, understood that waiting for that moment would keep me trapped. And I was done being trapped. Daniel could keep the phone. For now, my parents could keep their justifications. What I was taking back couldn't be swiped from a nightstand or transferred between accounts. I was taking back control. And they hadn't even realized the game had changed. The funny thing about clarity is that once you have it, you start seeing evidence everywhere. I didn't need to dig very hard after that. The more I paid attention, the more cracks I found in the version of my family I had spent years protecting in my mind. One evening, while looking for an old document in the hallway cabinet, I found a folder with my name on it opened. Inside were letters from colleges I had applied 2 months ago. Acceptance letters, scholarship details, information I had never seen. My hands went cold. They had intercepted my mail. Decided, again, what I deserved to know. When I confronted MOM, she didn't even look ashamed. She said the schools were too far, too expensive, too unrealistic. We didn't want you getting ideas, she explained softly, as if she were protecting me from disappointment instead of controlling my future. Dad added that it was better if I stayed local, helped at home, saved money for the family. For Daniel, that was the moment something inside me didn't just shift. It hardened. The phone had been disrespect. The bank withdrawals had been betrayal. But this was sabotage. They weren't just taking from me. They were limiting me, shrinking my world so it remained convenient for them. Daniel, of course, knew nothing about the letters, or at least that's what he claimed. But later that night, when I passed his room, I heard him joking with a friend on the phone about how I'd probably never leave anyway, because she's basically the backup parent. I stood there in the hallway, listening to the truth spoken so casually, and I felt the last thread of guilt snap. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't ungrateful. I was being used. So I stopped explaining myself. I stopped arguing. I quietly contacted one of the colleges whose letter I'd found and confirmed my acceptance was still valid. I arranged digital correspondence only. I gathered copies of my documents and stored them safely away from the house. At dinner, when Dad talked about future plans for the family, I nodded politely. When MOM mentioned how Daniel would need help with tuition soon, I simply said, "That won't be my responsibility." The table went silent. Dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't, because the Elijah who would have apologized immediately was gone. They thought my silence meant compliance. They thought my calm meant defeat. What they didn't understand was that I had already stepped outside the role they'd written for me. And once you step outside the script, the entire play starts to fall apart. Once I made my decision, everything became simple. Not easy, just clear. I worked more hours without announcing it. I packed slowly, one drawer at a time, folding pieces of my life in 2 boxes I kept hidden in my closet. I confirmed my enrollment, secured a small student apartment near campus, and transferred every cent into my new bank account. I even cancelled the old debit card without telling them. It wasn't revenge in the loud, cinematic sense. It was withdrawal. Emotional, financial, physical. At home, I became efficient but unavailable. I stopped reminding Daniel about deadlines. I stopped covering small expenses when my parents came up short. When MOM hinted that I should contribute more since we've done so much for you, I simply replied, "I've already contributed enough." The shock on her face was almost surreal. They weren't used to resistance without emotion. They didn't know how to argue with someone who wasn't arguing back. The night before I left, no one noticed anything unusual. Daniel was in the living room still using my phone like it had always been his. Dad was watching television. Mom was planning next month's bills aloud, already factoring in what I would help with. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, looking at the house that had shaped me, limited me, defined me. Then I quietly carried my suitcase to the door. The next morning, I was gone before they woke up. I left one envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a short note. I hope Daniel enjoys the phone. I won't be needing it where I'm going. No anger. No accusations. Just truth. By noon, my new phone, the replacement I'd bought with my protected savings, buzzed with missed calls from my mother. Emails from my father demanding explanations. A single message from Daniel. Wait. You actually left? Yes, I actually left. And for the first time in my life, the silence on the other end wasn't mine to carry. The calls didn't stop for days. First confusion, then anger, then guilt. Mom left voicemails asking how I could abandon the family after everything they'd done for me. Dad's messages were colder, reminding me that I was being dramatic, that I would come crawling back once I realized how hard the real world was. Daniel sent shorter texts. At first annoyed, then uncertain, then one that simply read, "They're fighting a lot." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't care, but because for once, I was choosing myself first. In my small apartment near campus, surrounded by boxes I had packed alone, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. No one knocking on my door without asking. No one calculating my worth against my usefulness. Just quiet. A week later, I agreed to meet them in a CAF halfway between my new place and the house. Neutral ground. Mom looked tired. Dad looked irritated. Daniel looked smaller than I remembered. They asked why I had overreacted. I listened, without interrupting. Then, I told them calmly about the phone, the withdrawals, the open letters. I told them how it felt to be the backup plan instead of the priority. They tried to defend themselves at first, but when I placed printed bank statements and copies of the college letters on the table, the air shifted. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to set boundaries." Silence followed. "I won't be giving money anymore. I won't be sacrificing opportunities. If we're going to have a relationship, it will be respectful, equal, or it won't exist." Daniel finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd actually leave. That's the problem," I replied gently. "None of you did." I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I finished my coffee, stood up, and walked away knowing something fundamental had changed. Whether they chose to grow or not was up to them. My growth no longer depended on their permission. They thought taking my phone would keep things the same. Instead, it cost them the version of me who stayed. And I don't regret leaving, because sometimes revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's about finally refusing to let them. That's all for today, folks. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.